Alrighty, guys. So I have been playing this sort of Forged in the Dark system that I've been working on, Storm the Matrix, and I just had some thoughts that I wanted to talk about, and other just general lessons that I've learned from this campaign that I plan on taking into future campaigns. And yeah, my thoughts on just the system itself. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was not really related to the system. It's just sort of a general RPG storytelling thing that I've come to realize over the course of these last couple of sessions, which is sort of like a hypocritical thing that I've been doing, which I've sort of just picked up on. And that's the fact that much like characters need to be motivated to exist and motivated to do things, so too do conversations need to be motivated to be, worthwhile and to exist, basically. So yeah. So I was thinking back on that Matt Colville action movie character video he did where he talked about Die Hard and how John McClane, is that his name, I think, doesn't run around and risk his life and nearly die because he wants to. He does it because he absolutely needs to. He's gone through every other attempt that he could possibly make to try to solve this problem through any way of not going inside by himself and trying to solve the problem. And yeah, I think that's just a thing that I've been trying to push for all my characters and for every player's trying to force them to come up with reasons, not just oh well, yeah, I've got a fondness for money and I guess I kind of want to do this because it would be nice. But when it comes to these you are putting your life at risk and this is a thing that you could potentially die attempting to do, you need to do it. You can't just generally want money. You need to either have a psychological obsession with obtaining money, or something like your brother has cancer and you need to pay for his treatment or else he's gonna die. But I realized I never did that with conversations. I just sort of set up some things that could potentially initiate a conversation if the players were so feeling up for it. But I realized, yeah, just like a character isn't going to go off and do something unless they need to do it. People are going to go out of their way to have a conversation unless they need to. People don't just randomly launch into a soliloquy about their backstory because they feel like, why not? This could be a good place for them to do that. If you're writing a movie, then sure, you can have that happen, and because you can just write that to have it happen. But in an RPG, people are, the whole always taking the path of least resistance, which, makes people act more realistically. People act the way that, they would in real life more often than not. And yeah, and usually in real life, people don't launch into soliloquies about their backstory. So yeah, you need to you need to have a conversation need to occur in order for people to talk. And so I've been thinking how do you have that happen? How do you contrive a reason for a conversation to need to happen? You create a situation where a decision needs to be made. Player A wants a specific result. Player B wants a mutually exclusive result, i.e., two players want two diametrically opposed outcomes from a thing that they want to do. And then thus conversation will ensue. Because either one person is going to be convinced by the other person's argument, they're going to back down, or a compromise will need to be reached. And the only way to get to this point is by them talking it through. Now this is delicate because you can't make this such a big deal that the players are literally going to kill each other or break up over this. But yeah, it does need to be a big enough thing that they are going to at least have to talk about it. So an example that I was thinking of, just in general, that kind of comes up relatively often in D&D is maybe you have like a paladin or a good character with some sort of oath or belief that you shouldn't kill prisoners. And then you have another player that really maybe they're just bloodthirsty, or more I think better would be like this prisoner has specifically done something wrong to this bloodthirsty character and they really want to kill this prisoner. Now these two people have to reach some sort of conclusion. Either the good character has to say like, okay, in this circumstance, we're learning a bit more about that paladin character or that good character, as they say like, all right, yeah, I'm willing to like not stay 100% true to my like belief in this matter. This is a circumstance where I'm willing to be like moved on this. Or maybe the bloodthirsty character comes to learn that like not everyone needs to get killed all the time. Or maybe they come up with some compromise in the middle. So yeah, I think this is going to be a new approach I take towards creating like an encounter at least once per session. I'm going to create an encounter working from the back forward, where I'm going to try to just think of a decision that could potentially be made, like two results that are mutually exclusive that two players would like want. And then work from there to figure out what is the situation that could come up that would result in that decision having to be made, and then contriving a reason to have the players end up in that situation. And again, obviously, you don't want to go full railroad. You don't want to already make the assumption of which of those choices they are going to make. They should both be choices. Obviously, like they should both actually be on the table. But yeah, so that's all I was thinking for the conversation. The whole I forgot about that core storytelling, truism of like things have to require needs in order for them to like come up and be relevant and all that yada yada. Okay, in order for them to like make sense. Okay, so now this was just a thought that I had on Forged in the Dark. The whole dice pools versus single rolls. And I do like the dice pools, but I think ultimately in my next system I'm going to go for the single rolls. Mainly because of one thing. So when it comes to a dice pool, you roll all your dice and you're like, okay, so I got like 3 6s. So wait, for this kind of challenge, oh, cool. So yeah, that's a crit. Yeah, right? Whereas, in which, it just, that immediate emotional response is just immediately dampened by the fact that you can't tell immediately that it's a crit. Whereas when you roll that d20 and it lands on the 20, everyone immediately knows how to react. Everyone, screams with joy, or at least gets excited because they're like, oh snap, that's a critical hit. Something cool is about to happen. It's very punchy, very responsive. It just works a lot better than having to figure out that you got a crit, and by the time you actually realize that you crit, that excitement is just like not there as much as it could be on that single roll d20 immediate response. I will say for the dice pool, lots of way to modify them. You can change the target number and how many dice you roll, and the results on individual dice, and re-rolling individual dice, or re-rolling all your dice. There's a million different ways. Whereas with the d20, for the longest time, it was just you add or subtract a number to your result. And then, 5e, they came up with advantage, which was cool. But generally, there's a great deal of sameness in how much you can really, like, basically anything that's positive, all they do is just add to your result. Anything that's just negative just takes away. Cover is the same as a shield, is the same as armor, is the same as magical effects, is the same as being hidden in a bush, is the same as all of that stuff. Which again, ultimately, with both the dice pool and the single roll, all you're doing is just changing the chance of whether or not you succeed or fail. So again, I think it's a sort of net neutral that it is like just generally simplified. But yeah, I do think I want to go for the single rolls in the future. Okay, so the other thing I do really, really like about the Forged in the Dark system is that the base core result, like the most common result for any check or any any action, is a mixed success, and as opposed to like D&D where you always just either succeed or you fail. I really like that the mixed success basically just like baked into the mechanics of the game sort of promotes the idea that every single action the players take naturally leads into this, okay, you take this action, but this thing happens, so you have to do this to solve that. But when you do that, something happens, so you have to do this. And that's just a very natural, connected, flowing way of telling a story. Whereas in D&D, very often it can feel like you guys are making rolls and you're succeeding, okay, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. There's just a very, every single roll is entirely its own thing that's happening, and there's just a loss of that connection, I feel, between everything that has occurred in this adventure or in this encounter so far. And that interconnectedness is like a story is basically just a beginning, a middle, and an end with a through line, and the but and so really strengthens and reinforces that through line that occurs in a story. Whereas the and then can almost feel like a million tiny just little individual stories that you kind of hope like people can make up their own through line for to I don't know. It's you can. I feel like this is a thing that you can really pick up on when you like watch a good, well written movie versus a bad movie. Not to say the and then can't work, and also to say this with any amount of mental gymnastics, you can turn an and then into a but so, and a but so into an and then. But ultimately, big fan of the mixed successes. I think this whole improv storytelling game we're playing, I think it is a really good philosophy to have when trying to build a game. Okay, so this thing is a thing that I personally don't really like for the Forged in the Dark system. But again, so basically it is just that Forged in the Dark is heavily player reliant in order to keep things moving and have stuff happen. Which again, this is a very subjective thing and very much so entirely dependent on the playstyle of your table as to whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. But basically, all rolls, all actions, everything is always initiated by the players. And, the DM never rolls dice, except for extraordinarily rare circumstances. But effectively, the DM never ever rolls any dice. Everything is always rolled by the players, and all actions and everything is always started by the players. Which, specifically where I think this becomes awkward is when it comes to like saving throws or things that would in D&D usually lead up to being a saving throw. So for example, the one thing that this really takes out of my toolbox as a DM, which is something that I really liked doing in D&D, is when everything is just slowing down and like nothing is happening and you want to have that and a guy walks in with a gun situation occur. Um, in Forged in the Dark, that kind of is a little clumsy when it happens because again, it's entirely up to like player uh like response, and I guess you're kind of like it can almost feel like you're breaking the game or not playing it as intended when you have consequences occur even when like nothing has happened that would like nothing rule wise should create that consequence. You can't just have stuff happen in Forge of the Dark. Like everything needs to be like motivated by a role. Uh, but yeah, so like as a DM, I like having that option of just saying like, okay, everything is stagnating, no one is doing anything. People just start making dexterity saving throws. Some bad stuff is just happening. Which is a good way to just if a conversation is starting to get out of hand or whatever, it's just like I need something to happen. You could just start having bad things happen. Whereas for Stark, you need to have the players do everything and move on to the next thing and start stuff. Um, which again, I feel like from a gameplay perspective, from a designing of the game perspective, this makes everything feel very fair. Like when bad things happen, it is always because the players attempted something and they rolled poorly or what have you. It's never just because the DM decided that bad things happen. And I can see why people would want this to be the case. Like if I were playing a board game, if I were playing Catan and some random card showed up and it just said half your settlements die to a plague or whatever, and it's just like, wow, okay, so just some bad thing happened that there was literally nothing I can do about, so I guess I just lose now. That would feel awful and horrible and suck. But like in in these storytelling games, there's not really that like winning or losing aspect. We're here to tell a story and to sort of emulate the lives of these characters, to play the roles of these people. And sometimes, bad things happen to you that you can't stop, that you don't have any option to do anything over or about. So I think it's more okay when it comes to a role playing to have stuff like that happen rather than like a proper game. Um, so yeah, so I think like the idea, so like in Blades in the Dark, you can't really have that situation of like this food is poisoned and you ate it and now you suffer bad thing, or like make a save or else a bad thing happens, or this thing is trapped and there's a bad thing is happening to you, make a saving throw or suffer a harm. Yeah, like there is none of that in Blades in the Dark. Everything needs to be like motivated by the player first. So if you do want to have some sort of situation where it's like this food is poisoned, in order for that to work in Blades in the Dark, what you have to do as the DM is this sort of thing where you are like, you have to hint, hey, well, this, you have reason to believe that it's possible that, this food might be poisoned. So you should make like a survey check to test to see if you can detect any poison or whatever. And then you like end up in this situation where now the player has to make this roll, and then it's like, okay, so you failed, so that means you didn't detect anything, and the consequence is that you did drink that poison and you suffered this consequence. Or there's like a mixed success where you're like, okay, no, you do detect poison, and then but your refusal of taking this drink has upset the other party or whatever. um which again, it's like it's very awkward to run those like traps and those poisons and things when it's like you need to like hint to the player like, hey, wink, wink, wink. You're pretty sure that this thing is probably poison, so you should almost certainly like take a check to make sure to not walk into this trap or poison that I basically have to tell you is here. And then like, well, once you like basically had to tell the player that, well, they're just going to be like, okay, so I'm just going to not like drink this cup. I'm just going to like choose to not open up this treasure chest. At which point, then yeah, then that then that poison or trap, like I guess, might as well not be there, or just not have a check involved with it at all. Which just feels very like awkward or clumsy when stuff like that comes up. But the alternative is not a whole lot better because now it's just a save or a bad thing happens to you. You know, because now it's just like, okay, well, you know, oh, you drank this cup and, you know, you didn't realize this, but it was poison, so now you have to make a fortitude save. Which again, so it's like, so what am I as the player? What am I supposed to do to not have that happen? Am I supposed to deliberately say that I'm supposed to make a perception check every single time I go to drink anything to see if it's poison before I go for it, and now I have to make this fortitude save? Like, what do I do to stop this from happening? Which again, I think that just sort of comes down to like using their passive perception, at least if this were D&D. So ultimately, what I'm trying to get at here is that I like saving throws, and I found it really difficult to run a system where there is no saving throws, where I can just say a thing happens, and you just have to make a roll to see just how bad it is. That, yeah, I found really tough to sort of wrap my head around as a DM. And I do think in my next system that I put together, there's just going to be some sort of like saving throw stat, or just have saving throw as a mechanic that players have to deal with. Okay, so yeah, it's just too useful as a tool to just get rid of it. Okay, so the last thing that I do quite like about Blades in the Dark, or Forged in the Dark, but I definitely do want to change a bit, is the simplified combat. Just as a whole, really big fan of the super simplified combat. It is just like every single time I've run D&D combats in the past, no matter what I try to include, be that the objectives and introducing terrain and making your positioning matter and using elevation and introducing forced movement and creating abilities for people to move and, you know, telegraphing attacks saying move out of this square or else these things are going to happen, or all the different enemy roles, and they have a healer and a wizard and all this, that, and the other, and they've got unique weird abilities and layer actions and legendary yada yada yadas and all this. Like, I have introduced like every combination of all of those things to some degree in all of my combats, and none of them have ever made combat not a slog. Like, combat has just always it always just turns into a slog. And I've been watching tons and tons of Dimension 20. I was like, just trying to wrap my head around, like, oh my god, like, how does Brennan Lee Mulligan, how does he make combat fun and exciting? Like, how are all of his, like, because that's the thing, I've watched Critical Role, and their combats also turn into slogs, and I was like, I don't know how people watch this, but, like, I was, like, watching Brennan Lee, it's like, his combats are always cool and engaging all the way through to the very end. And I finally picked up on like the thing that he does different, that he does to make D&D combat actually fun. So I've realized in D&D, the first round of combat is actually generally pretty fun because you've set up all these different elements and all these different things that are going on, and then you like ask the players like, so what's your plan, what's your approach, how do you do this? And the first round, when they're like, okay, so you go after their healer and you go protect to the objective, and I'll like just fight on the front lines and stop them, and and making all those decisions is cool. And then that first round of combat, everyone runs around and makes their rolls, and it's great, and everyone's doing their thing. And then the rest of the combat happens, where it's like, okay, guys, so we have our plan. Now it's about just going through this procedure, and everyone is just going to continue to make their rolls, and everyone is just going to continue to do the thing that they should do, and like kill the healer, protect the objective, or shoot whoever from a distance. And we are just acting out the motions, and everyone is just rolling dice until we're just rolling dice at each other until this thing finally ends. And I've realized what Brennan Lee Mulligan does is just every single round, new elements are brought into the battle. And every single round, everyone has to change their plan. Which on the one hand, if this were a good old classic board game, maybe it might be annoying to like realize like, well, what's even the point of coming up with the plan if we're just going to be forced to change it? And well, the plan is to deal with the new circumstances. So yeah, I've realized if you are going to run D&D, if you are going to do D&D combats, every single round, like, you need to force your players to come up with a new plan every single round. You need to introduce a new element every single round. Like Brennan Lee Mulligan, he's constantly having new characters show up and new elements, like different terrain things, just environmental conditions changing, that different people being put in danger, just various different things that happen that force people to change what they were doing. And people never just end up in I attack the ogre, he attacks me back, I attack the ogre, he attacks me back, I attack the ogre, he attacks me back. Like, people have to be doing something different every single turn. Which, yeah, just I think that's very much so the way to go about doing combat. Especially because in D&D, very naturally, it does the complete opposite of what an action scene should do. Like, when you play D&D encounters, basically how they are written to be played or whatever, you start off with, the enemy and the players generally on a roughly equal footing, and then you kill more and more of the enemies until it becomes more and more obvious that the players are going to win. And just the entire, like, escalation of the... how do I move this? The entire escalation of the combat is just generally tending towards a downward slope as there is less and less tension, as it becomes more and more clear as to what the outcome of this situation is going to be. Which just, like, is, like, so opposite to what an action scene should be. An action scene should just keep building up and up and up and up and up. And there should be more and more problems and factors introduced until it eventually just reaches this point where there is just absolutely nowhere else for the combat to go, for this scene to go, and like for there to be that like giant like moment of release, that like climax of the battle, and then after which you just like wrap up the combat, instead of doing this thing where like D&D is just like you've killed more and more of the goblins until there are so few goblins left. I just, as the DM, am gonna decide, yeah, you guys, you finish them off, and then you loot their bodies, you kill the stragglers, and then okay, cool, like, what do you guys want to do next? Yeah, you should definitely be just like keep adding new stuff until you reach that point of the climax, and as soon as that wizard lands that one perfect fireball that like wipes out half the enemies or whatever, as soon as it becomes clear that there is the winner, as soon as there's that one giant mega moment that occurs in the battle, um, that is when you wrap up the combat after that. Like I was watching the I was thinking of the specifically that one church scene in The Kingsman, and just like if that were to play out in D&D, it would be so incredibly lame because suit guy Kingsman, he would just do this as tactically as possible. You would just sit in a corner, hide behind cover and pick people off, and then there would be 10 minutes as he like picks off stragglers like one by one as carefully as possible until like it would just be lame. But that's not what happens. The scene is constantly building up as he starts off punching people, and then people are using chair legs to like hit him, and then eventually he's getting like stabbed, and then eventually at the very top, when the scene is at its most exciting, he stuffs a hand grenade in some dude's pocket, and then bouncer throws him into a crowd of people and they all explode. And then there's about 2 seconds of him cleaning up the stragglers after that, which really should be the escalation that I think D&D combats should try to emulate. And I guess the difficulty there is, how do you prevent players from Nova-ing, like in D&D, where usually it's just always right to start off the combat with your fireball to take out as many enemies as possible as early as possible, so that they can't just so they get as few attacks against you as possible. So I do think I might steal a thing from, like, I was watching some videos about the new MCDM, the Matt Colville new RPG, where you like accrue more ability and like I don't think they call it momentum, but like every class has their own unique thing that they build up over the course of a fight in order for them to use their abilities. Which I do think for my next system, I'll probably steal something like that, where you have to like just do basic lame attacks to start, and then those give you momentum points, and then you can do crazy, insane things at the end of the combat to end it on a high note. Okay, so yeah, I think that's I think like in general next system, I don't want slogs to occur. Like I think I want every combat to only ever be like, it'll be tough to do this sort of momentum gaining, because again, I very much so want to lean on the cinematic and not the tactical. I do not want people to sit around and hum and haw as they think about how many squares on a grid they should be moving and doing math for the combat. I do want people to just think about what would be cool. Again, since it's not going to be tactical, I do want them to generally be pretty snappy. So definitely no more than like 3 turns. Maybe for some sort of like final boss encounter, like maybe 5 turns, maybe. But like just enough for like everyone to get a chance to like do their thing in the combat and then just end it. So I think generally I want to try like a dungeon world-ish type of thing is for my next system. Because I do think that kind of has touched on a lot of the problems, it is again one of those very narrative first type of games, but there's at least a little tiny amount of crunch to the combat. And again, I don't want to have to force everyone to go around the table and for everyone to always have to do everything, but I definitely want that option available for people who it makes sense for them to do stuff, for them to go ahead and do those things. And yeah, so maybe like, yeah, Dungeon World, but with saving throws and with like a sort of momentum that you build up over the course of like an encounter or a session or something. Okay, so yep, that is everything that I was just thinking about. Just wanted to get all those thoughts out there for the next system. And I will see you later.